Thank you for joining us for today's craft chat. I'm Sage Brousseau, Director of Education at Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. Our mission at Fuller Craft is to provide meaningful discovery of contemporary craft through exhibitions, collections, education, and public programs. We're committed to challenging perceptions and building appreciation of the material world. Our purpose is to inspire, stimulate, and enrich an ever-expanding community. To learn more about our collections, exhibitions, other upcoming virtual events, or becoming a member, please visit us at fullercraft.org. Today, I am joined by Liisa Nelson. Her piece, Imaginary Morning, is currently on view at Fuller Craft Museum in the exhibition Particle and Wave Paperclay Illuminated. Liisa is an artist whose materials and subject matter vary widely and whose work reflects the awe she experiences through nature and culture. Liisa is a fourth-generation Montanan and internationally recognized artist. She has an MFA in ceramics from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. And in addition to having taught ceramics at Alfred, she has been a visiting artist at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing and an artist in residence at the, I don't know how to pronounce this. You'll have to pronounce it for me.
Jingdezhen Ceramics Institute.
One more time?
Jingdezhen Ceramics Institute.
Excellent. Most recently, Liisa has established her own gallery, Theory Contemporary Art Space, in her hometown of Great Falls, Montana. Welcome to the Craft Chat, Liisa.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm really excited to have you here to talk about your piece that's in Particle and Wave and talk a little bit about Paperclay. I'll bring that image up shortly, but I'm also really excited to hear more about your concepts, your practice, and we'll share some of those additional pieces with our audience as well. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up your piece.
Yeah, I was excited to be a part of this show. It's you guys, I think, are the last in the lineup of several museums that this has gone to. So super exciting to be in this show with so many other amazing artists and to kind of bring attention to paperclay as a material, because it's something that I have worked with a lot and that I really love, and I feel it has allowed me to kind of expand the possibilities of what clay can do. This is a piece that I made just after finishing graduate school, kind of right at the end of grad school. And so a lot of my work deals with, so many themes of kind of existential ideas about being human. And one of those things is desire, and like how we kind of express like the deepest desires that we have, whether that's like on a kind of like primal human level of like, you know, what are the things that like nourish our lives, but then also sort of like how does that lead into like spiritual desires or more deep kind of desires for understanding of who we are as people. And you know, and I think that I also have a really like poetic sense about, or maybe poetic approach to making my work, in that I don't always completely know what I'm doing when I'm starting a piece. So with this piece, the full title is Imaginary Morning in Our Distant Future Memory. So the idea was kind of about some sense of like remembering something like at the end of my life that hasn't happened yet. So for me, there's kind of like a sense of scale shift, and there's a sense of like longing for like a partnership or intimacy, or this kind of like divinely sort of brilliant or sublime experience and like connection with other beings. So, but it's expressed here as like these lions kind of in this this like sort of erotic, but also a little bit tense moment. And then there's this kind of dissolving into abstraction that I kind of use a lot as a mechanism in my work to just like open it up to interpretation. So kind of how more of like a, and I guess this is something that's related to like the poetic sensibility, that there's not like a specific meaning, but that it's more of like a feeling or a tone, and then the viewer can bring in their own sense of kind of what that meaning is to them. So this one's like quite like it's sort of this like energetic eruption, but it also is very forest like, and then it has this grid that for me refers to like fundamental geometry and kind of the building blocks of life at like their very basic form. And then I think it's also quite architectural. So it has
Yeah.
these different languages within it.
Yeah, and the animals, they have this sort of mythic sort of quality, I feel like, when I look at it, so I definitely start to see, like, um I start to form stories and kind of like, bridges to other familiar narratives and things like that that I find really interesting in your work. I'd love to talk a little bit about the material, and paper clay specifically, and what that's all about. Because I think that's something that it was kind of new to me. Like I had heard about it, but I really didn't understand what it was until we had Particle and Wave at the museum. Is it something that you started using recently, or have you always used that?
So I have been paper clay curious for a long time. But I really, I saw people like dipping things in it or using it to like coat solid objects and then burn them out. When I was in my post-bac program at the University of Colorado in 2015. And then in 2016, when I started graduate school at Alfred University, I really kind of dove headfirst into paper clay. And I found a clay recipe that I liked. And I mixed in like a ton of grog and a ton of paper. And what I was aiming for was a material that basically would let me do sort of like get away with things that normally you couldn't get away with in clay. So clay, probably a lot of people watching maybe have some experience with clay. Maybe some of you don't, but clay has a great ability it has like a really great compression strength, but like almost no tensile strength. So if things are kind of pulling away from each other, it's really easy to crack. And if you're gonna like dip a solid object, like let's say a tree branch, or another organic material that you want to burn out in the kiln and just have the shape of it as like the coating, made from the coating of clay. It's really hard to do that with regular clay because it shrinks a little bit and it'll crack and fall apart. But with paper in it, all of those fibers allow it to kind of grip onto itself. So it may still crack a little bit, but it's gonna retain its structural integrity. So you can do things that you normally wouldn't be able to. And another thing that I really love about paper clay is that I'm such a saver. Like I never want, even if my work, something happens, like there are a ton of mistakes in ceramics that are just kind of inevitable with the material. It's a really fragile material. Things crack in the kiln, things crack in drying. And paper clay was a way that I could take like shards of things or broken stuff that didn't work out, and I could like dip it in slip and then continue to build on it and kind of glaze things on top and fire it multiple times to salvage like, something that I liked the form, but the surface wasn't great, or it cracked, or the thing fell apart. And I could use paper clay then to like kind of stick things back together, or just build like more thin and things that require more tensile strength, like some of the small grid work. Yeah, this is a great example. So I didn't actually use paper clay for the main terracotta structure on this. But what I did was create a paper clay kind of clay, what we called in graduate school clays, or it's like a kind of combination material that has some qualities of glaze. It sinters or it binds, but it also has like the structural integrity of clay. Like it's not just going to completely melt and fall apart. So I used this, actually, the terracotta in this was a local shale. It's actually Alfred native shale that a group of us in grad school went down to the river and we collected some of it. And then we brought it back and we like ground it up into a usable clay. And so that was a really fun process. And then I just made all these little pieces and then stuck them together with paper clay. And so something like this, if you just use regular clay, likely would fall apart because it would, it just gets too fragile. But yeah, I was able to kind of get it to stay together through firing, and then I think fired that actually multiple times to get the globs on the second firing. And then these pieces also. So like these, so the one on the right, this one's called Rattle Down That Perspiring Loop. And it was like, the title was from a poem that I wrote during graduate school. But this one was made in several pieces. So first I made that like main kind of black body form, and then fired that. And then I built those sort of pillars in the midsection and fired that. And then there's sort of a white section on top of that I then built, fired that, and then built the sort of green like flurries on top and fired it again. So, and then glazed it. So that one's fired about like 4 or 5 times. And so that's kind of what gave me the ability to get like all of that vertical weight with so much space in the clay. This is about as tall as I am. It's about like,
okay. I was just about to ask you what the scale of these are.
yeah, it's about 5 feet 5 inches.
Wow.
That one, including the base. So that base piece is actually a separate piece. That's sort of sitting on as a pedestal, but I wanted it to be the scale of a body to kind of push my ability, like challenge myself in terms of scale, because I tend to do 21-inch sculptures. I don't know why, but that's sort of like a magic number. When I measure my pieces, they all tend to be kind of right in that scale, like just under 2 feet. So this was one I wanted to really push the scale and make something that was life size and really would reflect the body and feel and kind of be approached in the space like as a figure to figure kind of relationship.
So I think that this has a nice detail. Tell us a little bit more about this piece. Now this one, is this one smaller?
This is smaller. Yeah, this is probably I would say maybe 8 maybe 15 inches like squared or so. So it's not too big. But this one also was made with that Alfred shale, with that local clay. Yeah, and it was a piece. So you can see like the brown terracotta part that are sort of in chunks. That was actually a piece that I had made that completely fell apart. So in grad school, and even now, like I'm continuously experimenting with materials. And so it's almost like every piece I make, there's at least some unknown. Sometimes more than others. So there's a lot of like, I guess you could say quote unquote failure rate, although I don't necessarily look at it that way, because when I have a failure, it tends to become something else because of that paper clay, my ability to rearrange and re-sculpt and kind of revive things. So this brown part of it was a piece that had like crumbled and completely collapsed. And then the yellow is a white paper clay that I built up and around and connected some of those other pieces. And then on the right with the detail view, you can see there's like a lot of smaller pieces that I was able to kind of incorporate and stick in there with paper clay. And, you know, they had been glazed already, but then I put more glaze on top. So then get some really complex surfaces and a lot of depth with that kind of layering through multiple firings.
So material is a really large part of your process. It seems like are you more material driven or concept driven, or both?
Very much material and process driven more than conceptually. I think my conceptual kind of meditations are led by what's happening with the material, and I have always tended to be a very intuitively oriented person, and like I process the world intuitively. And while I appreciate like empirical knowledge and I'm fascinated with science and, you know, love to like listen to physics lectures and, you know, I have this like intellectual life that I love, but that's kind of that sort of over here. And what leads me in my, I think even in my life choices, but in my work too, it's like very much about how something feels, like if it feels right or if I feel curious about it. Um, and so, you know, ceramic material is so much like flesh, and when it's wet it's just so responsive. It's like it feels like a body. It has like weight and
Mm.
moisture and responsiveness and willingness to be um, be like a participant in its own making process kind of. And
Yeah.
then also to like respond really beautifully to gesture. And so while I'm making, it's very much about like, you know, I have maybe like a spark of an idea of a curiosity, and then I'll sort of start and then just follow where the material leads and where the process leads. And if something happens where I'm like, oh, that's a really great shape, like I want to make a pattern with that shape, or like what would this look like, and I kind of just follow it and then sort of see how things, you know, come together. So yeah, material is really important to me. And then also the transformation process of clay is
Mm.
so amazing and so inspiring, and it's a lot about like that kind of awe of nature that I mentioned in my artist statement. It's like this this need to engage with nature and the kind of like natural properties of physics, and be able to like almost have like a physical kind of conversation um, with like the physical world,
Mm.
and to try and be a participant in that to facilitate something interesting or beautiful, or, you know, maybe not necessarily beautiful but compelling in some way, or reflective of like something that's inside of me, which isn't a cognitive process. Again, it's like a thing that just sort of flows out. And then it usually through that process and afterwards, then I reflect and I'm like, okay, here's what this thing means to me, or here's what I think is kind of in this for my particular psyche, and maybe why I was compelled to do this. But then I hear so many different things from other people, which is really that's really when it gets interesting, when other people are like, oh, I see this or that, or um, they kind of bring in their own uh, interpretation, and then I am also learning like, okay, yeah, that is there, or it teaches me something kind of about other people or about how language works, or something that was in myself that I didn't see until somebody else pointed it out. So
Yeah, and I liked how you were talking about the clay as sort of like a flesh, and how it sort of is responsive. I feel like especially in clay and ceramics, you know, that you can't really boss the medium around. It kind of tells you what to do, or where it's going. So does that influence? I mean, it sounds like that influences your practice as well. Is that something that I don't know, do your concepts change as you continue to work on a piece or add to a piece?
yes, definitely. It feels like a conversation with the material more than like a dictation. And I think that's also a process that I love and that I need. And that's a kind of meditation for me, as a practice of like how to also kind of live the rest of my life outside the studio. It's like it's not about my will that I'm trying to sort of like assert on this thing. It's about like a thought that I have, or something that I have to like that I want to explore, or some part of myself that I want to share, or some like urge that I have to like interact, whether that's like with the clay or paint or other materials in the studio, or whether it's like, you know, in a social situation where I'm kind of curious about something, or you know, looking to have a particular, or to direct the conversation in a certain way. But then like what you get back from it is what makes it fulfilling, you
Mm.
know. And clay is really, it does, I mean, it totally has a kind of agency of its own.
Mhm. Definitely, I would agree with
So
that.
to try and like control it too much, I think is just to miss the opportunity to
Right.
open yourself up to new things and
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's something that's really hard for folks who are new to the medium. Like, you have to be willing to accept that it's gonna go wrong somewhere, and it's not necessarily gonna be perfect, and things are gonna explode in the kiln probably, and that can be really hard.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
sounds like that's actually a part of your process too, because you were mentioning before, that there are pieces of, like, a failed, sculpture or a failed piece in a finished work. That's really interesting. So tell me a little bit more about your influences and sort of the subject matter of your work.
I think the reason why I wanted to study art when I was in school is because I couldn't really decide like what I wanted to study science, and then I was like interested in political science and then religious studies, and so I kind of found that through art I could sort of be a scholar of all of these different things or do
Mm,
research and then respond to different areas of interest that I have about the world. And I'm so curious about like what sort of like what makes us tick as humans, and what is this like ontology that we're experiencing as like humans within these kind of strange bodies that came about from like a very specific set of circumstances within the universe on this planet that is one of probably, you know, infinite, maybe infinite planets that have life. And according to Stephen Hawking, we're not the only ones. Definitely mathematically it's like almost impossible. So
mm,
I kind of think about these large scale questions a lot, and then also look at like anthropology and religion and science. And I'm very interested in how like other people have in the past and now have asked these questions and tried to answer them. So I think those, and then also like, so there's that kind of big scale looking at like what is it to search, what is it to try and find meaning, um, and then within myself as well. So there's this like large scale view, and then there's this also deeply inward aspect to my work that's based on like my own practice as of like quietistic practice, and so kind of related to the interest in Chinese studies. I'm a practitioner of Taoism. So that's a very it's an indigenous Chinese religion, but it's based on stillness practice. So it's like quite uh, interested in like looking inward and just um, sort of receiving this like numinous awareness through quietistic practice. And so there's kind of this sense of insight and this like inner trust within my work
mm,
that is not necessarily asking or needing like a specific answer to a specific question. It's more about expressing something that feels like true, something that feels true to my experience of the world, and that maybe reflects other people's searching, or in whatever ways that might be, um, through abstraction and through form that kind of refers to bodies and refers to looking like quite literally the searching or the looking like an inner sight or seeing. um, so there's like eyes, or a lot of kind of eye like or organ like or face like
mm.
symmetry within a lot of my work that reflects like the sense of being, or the sense of searching, or the sense of like having a body and what that means, or how that's reflected in symmetry, like on all these scales of nature too, from like large scale um, planetary, or sort of the idea of like parallel universes and the kind of infinity branching to like very small sort of like waterways and veins, or like two cells dividing. And so this
Yeah,
like
and I mean,
something that I return to a lot.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's a lot of organic shapes in your work that do make me sort of think of nature, or I mean, even sort of like I'm seeing like organs. So there's like all this like biology in nature, but you also do repeat grids in your work, and I'd love to know a little bit more about how that shows up in your work and what that's about.
I like juxtapositions. I like having things that are kind of opposite and then challenging their opposition by putting them together, or by like blending one into the other, or having one being kind of swallowed up by the other. So this piece that's on the screen now, this one's called Entropy, parentheses, work early, I'll get it later. And so it's kind of about this like structure. The title makes it really feel more personal because it's about like structure that kind of falls apart, or something that you're really trying to keep together, but then there's this like stuff that gets piled on top of it, and maybe it's beautiful stuff, but it's still kind of disruptive. And so it's about that like tension that gets created between structure and then and kind of chaos. And I think a lot with this relationship about like how evolution happened, and how there's these patterns that are set, that have repeated over and over and over again, but then it's the deviation, it's the genetic accidents that allow for a huge amount of variety, and kind of new possibilities of different life forms that come about. So that sense of pattern, I think, is sort of at the root of what the grid is. And then it's also referring to geometry and kind of like the fundamental makeup of the systems that define the reality that we live in.
It's really, and it's like order within chaos. There's a lot. Yeah, the juxtaposition is really striking to me, and I like that. I like seeing things repeat, and kind of it makes me wonder a little bit about how these pieces evolve. They seem to have, kind of like the material itself, they seem to kind of have a life that is beyond just what we're looking at a little bit, which I think is cool.
Thanks. That's great to hear, because that's how I feel about them. And I hope that kind of, I want that like sense of sort of like, to use a Taoist term, like numinous pervasion. It's like this thing is sort of impregnated with some mystery that makes it into kind of a transcendent object that has the power to like take you from your mundane state to kind of like spark something that maybe connects you to a deeper level of yourself, or to a new mode of thinking.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience in China, because I know that you've been on a little bit of a journey, and things kind of got interrupted, like most of us, over the last year. Did you um, did you go to Asia because of your interest in Eastern religion, or was it specifically to study in these specific places?
Yeah, sort of both. So it started out when I was when I was actually a senior in college, just finishing my capstone project. I audited a class with Professor Louis Komiathi, he's a East Asian religious scholar, and he's also a practitioner of Taoism, and he's like ordained in a lineage of Huashan Mountain in China. And so I became involved with his group with the Taoist Foundation that he founded, and began kind of practicing Taoism. And he really influenced me a lot, because the way that he teaches, it's very much like scripture based and tradition based. And so he would explain like the meaning of like some of the Chinese characters within the Tao Te Ching, for example, and just like everything that was kind of packed into those characters, all the different meanings and kind of cultural context. And you maybe have like a 2-character phrase, but it's just so full of information and of like a sense of this like really incredible culture that's beyond that. So that's kind of what first got me interested in Chinese language and in Taoism. And then I started to study the language, And in 2000 and I want to say 2011, I took a trip to China and was there for about 8 months studying Chinese and teaching English and traveling around, and didn't really get into ceramics at all there, but it was more of kind of like a cultural experience and language study. And then, with my career in ceramics, I've always wanted to kind of to go back there and work. Because I visited Jingdezhen during that first trip as a traveler, but I didn't really feel like I knew how to access things there. And then, yeah, once I went to grad school at Alfred, Alfred has a really great exchange with the Central Academy of Fine Arts. So we send them students, or Alfred sends them students every spring who are American, and then in the fall semester, CAFA sends students to Alfred. And so there's this sort of like leapfrogging where the students all get to know each other. And they also so as part of that, Alfred also sends a visiting artist from time to time as people are interested in it or as it works out. So I heard about this and I was like, I need to go. And just kind of like told them that I wanted to go until they invited me. So yeah, and that kind of opened a lot of doors for me to be able to actually work there. And I got to work with students and learned a lot about just like the differences between Chinese ceramics. And I mean, even just the material differences are amazing. Like Chinese porcelain is like a whole different material than any of the clay that we have here. It just has different properties. And so you have to work with it in different processes. And so that was really, really an amazing experience. And then I wanted to go back and work in Jingdezhen some more. So then I'd found that second residency through the Jingdezhen Ceramics Institute while I was there with CAFA. And so, yeah, China is amazing. I mean, it's quite well connected. Like if you go there, if you have the opportunity to be involved with one institution, it's there's like all these other things that kind of open up, and it's a really amazing international community there, especially in Jingdezhen, of ceramic artists. So
I did not know that. That's really cool. I'm just going to remind everyone that we have about 15 minutes left in this conversation, and that everyone's welcome to enter any questions they have into the Q&A or via the chat function. I'm going to pull up some more. There's a couple more pieces that we haven't looked at, and I have some questions about. More sort of circular piece is a lot different than the previous ones we've seen.
This is from a series that I made that was in reference to alchemical medieval manuscripts. So this was something that I continued to return to in graduate school, and still is like a pretty, maybe not as direct of an informant to my my work now, but is still quite relevant. As I in grad school was thinking about like all of my diverse interests and trying to figure out like how can I link up science and religion and this kind of need for self-transformation and searching. And I sort of, and also this transformation that happens with ceramics, and kind of make sense of it within the context of clay as a material. And so I really started diving into these medieval alchemy manuscripts, because the alchemists were very much about like a spiritual orientation, a spiritual transformation led into gold. Was not just about the materials. It was about the transformation of one's inner self through knowledge and enlightenment, through kind of like finding this, whatever this like missing piece of understanding was. And so it was all about searching and self-transformation. And these medieval manuscripts, they're just so rich with imagery and symbolism. And so I started drawing literally from some of these manuscripts for my forms. So this is actually a very literal image that's from a 15th century. So, and there was this smoke. So this is it's an alchemist's vessel, and it's depicting some process of transformation that's happening with these kind of like bubbles within this vessel, and then this steam that's coming out of it. And the steam actually on this is paper clay that I piped on with a small tipped applicator onto some paper.
Wow.
And it was like there was a small ball of paper on the inside, and then I piped like all the little lines, and then that dried out, and I wrapped it again, and then piped more. And once that was dry, I wrapped it again and piped more. So there's this sort of like layer upon layer to try to get this like bubbling, smoky. It's not quite smoky, but it's this kind of like emission of something that's like gaseous and airy.
It's incredible what the paper clay is able to do with this medium. It's really fascinating. The more I learn about it, it's just really interesting. I wanted to take a look at this slide because I'm really curious about this piece on the left.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is a little bit of an outlier for my work, but it's in some ways. But this one's a lot like kind of a thought about ritual.
Okay.
I found this really great coffee mug that was all these like really it's kind of cheesy like Shakespeare quotes about love. And I mean Shakespeare's great, but it's like it's like the most cliche lines that they kind of group together on this coffee mug. And so I had this material that was like kind of a clazy, it's a low fire, what it is a low fire self-glazing clay body that I got from the Val Cushing handbook, which is a great resource available that Alfred the Alfred University bookstore has this book. So if you don't have it, it's like $28, maybe 25, and it's a great resource. So I got this clay body from there and just fired it onto, I was like curious about this kind of like idea of ritual objects in our daily lives, kind of in our mundane culture, but things that are still important, like your cup of coffee every day. And then I wanted to just make it into this like dualistic object that sort of had this like ritual goblet on the other side, that was attached with this material that I was curious about. And it ended up getting pretty deformed, but I sort of just loved the softness of that shape, and also the idea of something that's kind of like almost melting off, as if there's this like history of ritual that's kind of getting softened or or like a little bit deformed into like a modern sense about what ritual is. So think about juxtaposing those histories. And then
So your work has been traveling around with the Particle and Wave exhibition, and you've been traveling around and have landed back in Montana for the moment. I would love to know what's next for you.
Me too. Things are up in the air for me. I think, right now is such a moment where I think that's true for so many people. We've all been sort of halted in what we were doing. At least most of them. Some people seem to have plowed through, but I've been sort of deeply quarantined for this last year. And I've got some lines that I've cast out into the universe for different residencies and jobs. And I would love to teach.
And
to teach in university at some point.
Right. And so during COVID, this is when the idea to have the gallery occurred to you?
Yeah. So thanks for bringing up the gallery. Yeah, that's been a fun project because I've always wanted to do a bit of curating, and I think in grad school I was focused so much on making that I wasn't as focused on like presentation of my work. And so I had this space that actually I had rented as a studio space, but then as it became more clear that the quarantine was going to like continue on for a long time, I had this lease on the space, but it's kind of in a public shared building. And so I instead made a studio at my home. And then I still had this lease. So I was thinking like, well, maybe I could do something like a gallery where I only have to be there for a short time to install things. And then I won't be spending as much time there. And then that kind of became then a venue, an idea to host other artists. And so, yeah, so I did a group show in December, and I'll probably do another one this summer coming up. So yeah, it's called Theory Contemporary Art Space, and it's mostly been an online activity, and I've hosted several artists for artist talks through our Instagram platform as well. But yeah, with that brick and mortar space as kind of the foundation, but mostly most of the activity has been online because I wanted to create something that could be COVID safe, but still keep people engaged. And
yeah, I mean, it's incredible how much you can access. I mean, during COVID, the access to the arts, I feel like it was expanded in a lot of ways. Obviously, we haven't been able to be in physical spaces as much, and in the museum world, that's been kind of a challenge. But it's a challenge that I've embraced. So it's really exciting to see other artists doing that as well.
I agree. Yeah, there's been a lot of, I mean, there's just been so many conversations about access in general through, I mean, not only because of COVID, but because of Black Lives Matter and just this cultural awareness level rising, or just this cultural like decision to kind of become more educated and aware and more responsible for inclusivity and for like not having, you know, prices on things that are exclusionary, or, you know, to kind of have this like economic part of it. And then also this like online presence out of necessity, but also, you know, kind of supporting the idea of accessibility. So
Yeah, absolutely.
a lot of good changes.
Yeah, no, but it's been a wild ride, and I'm really happy to have been introduced to your work. It was during COVID that we opened this exhibition, so kind of during this time, I've been introduced to your work, and it's really, really wonderful. I think we're gonna have to end it here today, but I really encourage everyone to come and see the exhibition. It's open through June 6th. I'm gonna just share my screen one more time. Uh, I hope everyone has enjoyed this talk, and they'll come and enjoy visiting the museum in person and more of our craft chats. If you want to know more about Fuller Craft and everything that we're doing there, both in person and virtual, please visit us at fullercraft.org. I want to thank everyone who is watching today and listening today. On behalf of myself and my colleagues at Fuller Craft, thank you, Liisa, for a really interesting conversation about materials and concepts and clay.
Thank you so much for hosting me. This has been awesome.
Yeah, it's really been great meeting new artists this way, and I wish you luck in the future, whatever's next. And I'm gonna look at your work a little bit more and think some more about all these really great things that are happening with it. So thank you, and thanks everyone for coming.